All right, here we are, the Krāv Show. If you're tuning in today, it's going to be a little different. We're calling this a side quest. We're going on a side quest today for all of you D&D fans out there. So if you're tuning in to this episode, clicking on YouTube or Spotify or wherever, expecting to hear us talk about skydiving, you might as well just turn it off because not today, brother. I don't know what all we're going to talk about. We got a few things on the agenda, but
Yeah,
it probably won't be skydiving. I mean, who knows? Maybe skydiving will come up,
maybe.
but we're going to do these from time to time. JRuss and I like to talk about all sorts of sometimes weird stuff. So who knows? We may get philosophical. We may get goofy, weird. I don't know. But this is our first ever Krāv side quest. And
So, and just to fill everybody in, it's not really the first one. It's the first one we're going to record because we had one where we didn't press record, and I think that one we spent talking mostly about religion.
yeah.
And then at the end of it, we thought, oh, we should have recorded maybe. And then the next day, I talked to somebody at the drop zone and just told him what had happened, and he was like, "Oh man, I would have loved to listen to that." And so we said that's the last time we're going to not record.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
So Chris just opened this beforehand chat with. So Chris is apparently 45, which I learned today, and
That
I'm
is
52,
true.
and both of us are at a time in our lives where, sadly, somebody wants to look in our butt, and and
Why
doctors.
would anybody want to make that their career? Like why? So you're sitting there and you're like, dude, you know what I want to do? I
Yeah,
want to I want to stick a camera up people's butts. That's what I want to do with my life. Why would anybody do that?
I don't know. I really don't know. So I said, okay, Chris, hit record, and we'll see if we're going to publish this. And so there were two things that immediately came to mind. A week ago, maybe a little more. I'm down in Arizona right now doing a little bit of military work. But before we came down here, Steph makes my doctor's appointments because I am not that motivated to make those appointments where somebody's going to touch my butt. So she makes them for me, and she made the doctor's office said we can make that appointment, but you have to come in and do like a preliminary, like you got to get a baseline of your physical condition and take some blood and all that stuff. And so I went in there for my appointment, and this woman, I would venture, was no more than 25 and pretty cute, came and sat down in front of me and started asking me questions. And as soon as she walked in, I thought, I don't know. I don't know about this. I don't know if this person is going to see me in that state. And and so I finished up, and it didn't, nothing. I kept my clothes on the whole time, and they took some blood and did some baselines, and Steph called to cancel my appointment there today. And when I went home, I was like, honey, I don't know how you chose that doctor's office, and I kind of relate to her, like, hey, this is really pretty cute 25-year-old blonde girl. I don't know if that's the person that I really want putting a finger in my butt. And, and she said, oh, I'm not sure if that's what I want either. And I said, how about like some 70-year-old dude who doesn't really care? Yeah. Okay. So that's not actually the story, if you can believe it. This is the story.
I
So
told
about
y'all
4 or
it
5
might get
years
weird.
ago, yeah, it might. It is kind of right now. About 4 or 5 years ago, Steph made another appointment for me and said, oh, you should have had this done when you were 45. And I didn't, and I had it done when I was maybe 48 or 49. And I go to the doctor's office, and we're chit-chatting, this guy about my age, and he's doing all kinds of regular tests. And in the middle of it, I was like, Doc, is it still like a finger in the butt thing? And he said, yeah, that's the thing. I was like, man, all the technology we got, really, he's like, it really is the best way. Like, it really is. And he's like, I caught some guy, with pre-prostate cancer or prostate cancer, but it's super early, and he's 46, he's about your age. And so, but then it's quick and easy, and he's he moves on with no problem. Okay. So a few more minutes, and then he's finally like, okay, it's that time.
Here we
Here
go.
it comes. Yep. So, okay, take your pants down, bend over the table. He's like, okay, I'm going to put my left hand on your butt cheek, and then here comes my finger. And not to be overly personal.
I'm trying not to imagine it, but I can't stop.
Yeah, he can't stop. But that's the first time anything's gone that direction in my life. So, whoa, okay.
Have you seen Fletch?
Yeah, using the whole fist there, Doc. And so he
Moon River.
Exactly. That's exactly how I felt. Like, oh my God, what am I in here for? So right then, like he's got a couple digits in my butt.
Oh, come on.
The frickin' door opens.
Whoa.
The office door.
No.
So both of us at the same time are like, no. And like kicking at the door with, like, I'm naked with a finger in my butt, kicking at the door. And he's kicking at the door and his finger never came out at me. And it's like this 15-year-old kid that was in the waiting room with me who clearly got confused about where the exit was.
Oh my gosh, dude. Talk about traumatic.
And I'm looking back at the door, and the doctor is, no, close the door. And he opens the door, and he was like looking at the ground, expecting to leave the facility. And he looks up and goes, ah! And like, closes the door and runs. And so I just am like, what the heck?
What just happened?
And the doctor is just, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm sure he thought I was going to sue him.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. He must have apologized like 100 times. I was like, man, it's not cool, but whatever, it happened. And so he's trying to play it off a little bit. And I was like, you know what, Doc, to be honest, like, I'm guessing that kid is way more traumatized than I am.
Oh, heck yes. Heck yeah.
Like he's going to be like, oh, I don't want to be 40.
Yeah. That kid is still having nightmares.
Yeah. That's
man, that is awesome. That's a good story.
Do you know, this is a little bit of skydiving. Do you know the Zion free fly team from Norway?
Yes. I mean, I don't know them, but I think I actually met them one time, or one of them, but yeah, I know who they are.
Super good people. Anna Mox, Andreas, Petter, and then Christian Moxness stepped in when Andreas got hurt, I think. And I saw them like the next day, and I told them the story, and then they were all like, well, I think when we're in the plane, we've got to do a handshake. And I said, okay. And they held that up to me, and I stuck my finger in, and they gripped it, and that was our handshake from then on. And I just saw them a few months ago, and they all did the exact same thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, actually, yes, Anna, because Anna is one of the owners of the Edge.
Oh yeah.
And they do all the marketing, help us with marketing for Krāv.
Yeah. Great people.
Yeah, really cool. That's awesome. That is funny, man.
Well, with that opener, I mean, we can go a lot of different directions, really.
Well, here we can go this direction. It's not really my shirt. I want to ask you what you think about it. Can you read it?
Porn kills love.
Yeah, it's a organization, Fight the New Drug. They've been around for I don't know, actually maybe 8 or 10 years now. But they do a lot of stuff trying to promote just it's not a Christian, it's not a religious, it's not from a moral point of view. They don't even talk about, they don't say that porn is wrong or that it's bad. They just, from a purely I guess scientific or research, from a data-driven point of view, like, what does pornography do to your brain? How does it affect you mentally? How does it affect you emotionally? What is it? I mean, just through pure research and data, what does it do to people? People who spend a lot of time consuming pornography, what do their relationships look like? What does their sex life look like? And so they've just they've just gathered so much data, not just themselves, but also utilizing other organizations and people and research around the world and stuff. And they've put out some very, very interesting stuff. And they have, you can go to their website and see different videos, and they have educational content and all sorts of stuff. But I just ordered this shirt from them a while back, just as a way to kind of support the organization and what they're trying to do. So
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't wear this shirt very often because it's kind of weird to wear it and then walk around, because I never know what people are going to think or how people are going to interpret it.
Well, interesting to me, that's a very unassailable, I think, unassailable message on your shirt. And
What do you mean unassailable? What do you mean by that?
well, hopefully it's not bad. That's not the right word, but hopefully it's not incorrect to say that most people in their life have seen porn, and um, and it's not very scientific for me to say what I'm going to say, anecdotal at best, because it's just my experience. But the times that I have viewed it, I know for certain in myself that there's a change in me as far as my sexual drive towards my wife, and if and so I not I mean, I think maybe people don't know I'm not a religious fellow, and although I hope I have morals and ethics, but just from that experiential basis, I don't view it very often because I don't want it to adversely affect my relationship with Steph, and I know that if I did view it a lot, it would. Um, Even actually a little bit makes a change, and it's not a change that I really like. And so the I guess I'm going to guess that most people have felt something similar, but have maybe, I mean, we all have different reactions to those feelings. So for some people, I know that there's an addiction to porn, and like you,
Yeah.
really to the detriment of your relationship with the person that you're with, and that's obviously causes problems in relationships. But I think that for with the baseline knowledge that of mine that most people have viewed porn at some time in their life, they've probably done more than just view it. And then they've probably, I mean, we're all built very similarly, and so they've probably had a very similar reaction in themselves. Maybe some people no, but most times when I feel things like that, I don't think it's unique to me. I don't think I'm the, the exception to the rule. Um, and so that means that your shirt, in my opinion, conveys a message that most people can identify with. And
Mm.
there's not a lot of, it's not a moral message. You're not commanding anything. It's not an ethical message. It is more of just an observation of the real world that you're carrying on your shirt. And and I think that is somewhat unassailable. Like you can get people to a defensive position if you shake the foundations of their belief system. But when it's an experiential system, it's much harder to shake that in people. It's much harder to make them feel shaky. It's just something you experienced. And people can't tell you that that didn't happen because you experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that probably a lot of people would look at that, and I would argue that most people would go, oh, yeah, kind of.
Mm.
Um, and the only thing that I guess I would perhaps disagree with is that I still love my wife, and it didn't necessarily kill that, but maybe I don't know. I wouldn't want to water the statement down because it's powerful the way it is, but excessive porn or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
is maybe more true to
Mm-hmm.
the real life situation. Or
Yeah.
maybe there's some people that they view it once and that's it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Well, and
yeah,
I think the way I was kind of thinking about understanding the message that it's not like a gunshot to the head. It's not
right.
instant, but that over time it will it will it kills it over time.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
kills love,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and I've noticed in myself those times, in my life or whatever when I have consumed or watched porn, that it also changes not just the way that I think about my wife, but the way that I view women in general. Like I stop. It affects the way you see them, not as people, as beautiful humans, as creation, as something valuable, as a person, but you start just seeing every girl, every woman as a object, I mean, it really is. It teaches you, it trains you to objectify the other sex.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does. I mean, that's the kind of the basis of what it is. It is pure objectification. Um,
Yeah. Um, so, I mean, I guess we said this is a side quest, so we can go anywhere. But
yeah.
I used to bartend. That was how I spent uh, the from the time I was in college. At about 19 or 20, I got a job at a bar, and I bartended for a long time. I owned a bar. I managed a few bar restaurants, and near the end of my bartending time, which was, I think I was probably not that long ago, 42. So at most 10 years ago, I worked at a strip club for a few years. And at first, I like women, and there's women without a lot of clothes on running around, and made a lot of money, and it was great. And then I got to know some of the women that worked there, and it stopped being great.
Mm.
And by the end of my time there, do you remember the story of Pinocchio?
Mm-hmm.
Pinocchio, he wanted
Sure.
to be a boy, and at some point he kind of hangs out with boys, and like they go in the city and it's bright lights and everything's cool, and then it turns to midnight and he grows a tail and everybody turns into donkeys, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like a trap, and he's got to get out. And that is how I felt. Like, I have got to get out of this place. That it is just misery, and I am profiting from that
Mm.
misery. And it just really made me sad after a while. And so I stopped working there, but that experience definitely changed the way that I feel about that industry in general. Because I had been to strip clubs as a customer before, but after working there, I don't want to go.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and porn is mixed right into that. And in addition to what's on your shirt that I think is very relevant, there's the other end of most of the people that are involved in that industry have been through some serious trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, in my experience, that is exactly what you imagine that it's going to be. That trauma is what you know it to be. And I knew no one who worked at the bar who hadn't been through that trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just pretty sad.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to be a downer, but it kind of is. And if you're gonna, I I'm split in some ways, because I don't necessarily think that the people that consume porn, or even the people that go to strip clubs, most of the time they're not bad people. They just maybe haven't thought all the way through the situation, or they don't want to think all the way through it. They want to go and have a good time, and maybe not be burdened with the reality of what is on the other end of their good time.
Yeah. Well, and on the surface, I mean, just from a biological standpoint, it's enjoyable. You know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah.
especially for guys, we're visual.
Mm-hmm.
Like, boobs are awesome,
Mm-hmm.
right? No, I mean
Yeah.
that I don't mean that in a crass, crude. I'm just saying, like, women are beautiful. Women are really nice to look at, and that's an awesome thing. That's good. Like, we should enjoy that. But I think what porn and strip clubs and um, whatever else is connected to that, it's a perversion of something good, something that's meant to be really, really good and beautiful. It gets perverted, it gets twisted, and it gets turned into something that becomes a trap, and that actually doesn't give you what it promises. It doesn't give you the satisfaction that you're looking for. It doesn't give you the joy and the pleasure that you're hoping for. It really is. It's an it's an empty it's an empty water jug in the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
you see it and you're like, oh, yes. And then it's just sand. It's dirt in your mouth.
It's a good analogy. Yeah.
So that's what,
I
I
think
mean,
you're
that's what
right.
makes it, I mean, that's what draws, whether it's everybody on earth or not, but a lot, especially, I mean, I would venture to say at least a lot of guys, surely most guys
For sure.
have.
Yeah. It reminds me of, the research that was done with putting a rat in a very barren cage, and it had access to like cocaine in the water, or it had a regular water bottle and then a water bottle laced with coke or heroin or something like that.
I'm not
It's
sure.
really interesting research, and basically, in the absence of anything to do, the rat will bypass the water that it needs to live and just go for the drug infused water. And I don't know, it originally proved something about addiction, but then what they did was they changed the cage to have scenery and maybe other rats and a spinny wheel and stuff the
Like
rat can climb on, and it can move all
rat
over the
activities.
cage. Yeah, like a real life. And then the rat bypassed the drug infused water and just drank water. And of course, the summary of that from the research, there's a TEDx talk that I'd heard of the research before, and then I saw a TEDx person talking about it. And the basic idea was, if we can extrapolate from that, if you're addicted to drugs, or you're, say in this case we're talking about porn, you need to change your cage. The cage that you've kind of made for yourself, which is probably just your world, is not the right one. And if you can do that, and this is an oversimplification for sure, because I think especially addiction is more complicated than this, but it's at least a good starting point of like bringing yourself out of perhaps behaviors that are harmful, and whether that's drug use or drug abuse, I should say, or abuse of porn or whatever. It has to do with perhaps the life that you've created for yourself, and thinking about that. It was interesting research.
That's very interesting. That I've kind of wondered for a few years, and even I guess kind of dreamed of using. Is there a way that we could use skydiving to help people overcome addiction? Because I think part of what I heard, what you were saying, maybe I'm maybe this is not what the research shows, but like just how valuable community is and relationship, and how that can help us. And I see in the skydiving community the opportunity for people to have something to do. Number one, something that's enjoyable and exciting, and then also to connect with a group of people in a community that could really help a person overcome some of that stuff.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it would, I think it would require the right group of people, the right, format or whatever to wait. I don't know how it would be done. I have just thought of that and kind of dreamed, man, what if we could do that? What if we could somehow help people get out of addiction when they're in the right place? I mean, because I think I do believe in treatment and counseling and the things that people are doing. There's lots of great places out there that serve and help people overcome addiction of all kinds. But maybe it's just one part of that treatment. Like,
Yep.
get them involved in skydiving. Let us love on them and take them up in the plane and have fun, and bring them into the community to where we want to try to hold each other accountable and be healthy,
I think it'd be great. I agree that it would be part of the program. And there's, I know that I can think of a couple people off the top of my head who had addiction issues and before they got into skydiving, and they were pretty self-aware when I talked to them, that they knew they were trading one addiction for the other. And so an addiction to skydiving was preferable to addiction to whatever they had been addicted to before. And I agree. I think if you feel that's your kind of personality, that at least switching to being addicted is something that could be healthy and constructive, is better than being addicted to something destructive.
Yeah. We had talked about that last time when we didn't record. We talked a little bit about like good and evil and
Mm.
bad stuff in the world, so that kind of thing. We talked about quite a bit of stuff, but I've been thinking about that a whole lot, and I came up the other day. I was just sitting thinking, and I thought about an analogy. Kind of a story came to my mind, and so I created this story in my mind, and I was like, "Oh, I want to share that with JRuss and see what he thinks about it, and like hear your honest feedback on it." Um, so it's kind of dealing with this idea of, if there is a God, if God is supposedly good and he's all powerful and he's all knowing, then how can there be bad? Why does he allow all this bad stuff, evil and pain and suffering? So, okay, what if we sat down and I showed you a documentary, and this documentary was about a man who lives in a house, and in his house is full of puppets, like actual puppets that he has made, all these puppets himself. And they're all different kinds. And he uses the puppet. They're puppets. So the only way they do anything is if he does it. Right? Like that's the way puppets work. So these are just normal, real puppets. They're not magical. They don't do anything on their own. But every day he interacts with these puppets. They're doing all sorts of stuff. There's this whole community and world of puppets in his house. And in the documentary, we see that this guy loves these puppets. And when the puppets talk to him or talk about him to one another, they love him. Well, how would you characterize that love, or how would you criticize? What would you think about that love that they have towards him and that he has towards them?
Hmm.
And then you want to answer that question? Or you want me to keep going?
Well, you can keep going.
And then from time to time, these puppets, they do bad things to one another. Sometimes one puppet will beat another puppet, or steal from another puppet, or murder another puppet. Well, obviously, puppets, they're puppets. So who's really doing it? Who's making the puppets do all those things, right? Like, you have to remember, these are they're not magical puppets, that they're not dolls that came to life. So, how would you feel about, like, how would you criticize that? How would you think about that? What would that be like? And if we said, and then if we contrasted that with a documentary, and those puppets, they praise him. They say how awesome and how wonderful and how great he is. The ones that are doing good, that don't get hurt, they get protected and get saved or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then we contrasted that with a documentary on Mother Teresa, who lives in a place where she takes care of all these kids and people who she can't control, and who sometimes are mean to her, sometimes are mean to others. And when she talks about her love of those people that she cares for, and they talk about their love of her, how would we feel different about that? And the bad things that those people in Mother Teresa's world, in her home, or wherever she lives, the bad things they do to one another, how would we characterize that differently from the puppets?
Well, if I back up to the original question, I think, are these marionette puppets, or are they puppets that were set in motion, grew on their own, but still interact with the creator? Or is the creator
No, these are just
constantly
normal.
manipulating them?
Yeah, they're just normal puppets that he's constantly manipulating. They're like
So
real.
then,
They're just regular old puppets.
yeah,
Like, you
then
got to
if
stick your hand up them and move them,
right,
or marry, or with the thing.
yeah, but that means that whatever violence or anything that's bad that's introduced into the system came from the creator, the puppet master, the
Mm-hmm.
whatever you want to call that person.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's interesting that you bring this up, because one of my favorite podcasts to listen to is Joe Rogan, and he had a physicist on who is deeply religious, and has tried very hard to reconcile those two positions. And the argument, as I understand it, for the existence of evil in a world created by a benevolent, omniscient, and omnipotent deity is free will. That mankind was given free will, and because of that, evil was introduced into the world. In the idea that you're saying, benevolent, in my understanding of that word, means all good. There is no evil in there. And if that's the idea, then I don't think it works for the puppet thing, because if there's no evil in the puppeteer, how could there possibly ever be murder or violence or whatever out of the puppets, because the person or being controlling them has no evil in them. And so I think that just on a logical basis, that part would break down.
Wait, hold on. I'm not sure that I followed what.
Well, if you start from sorry, there's people talking outside. I don't know if you can hear that, but I apologize. If you start from the puppeteer, the person or entity controlling the puppets, if you start from the premise of no evil exists in that entity or being or whatever, then there's no evil that can possibly be translated to the puppets, because there was none to begin with. If it's a truly benevolent deity being, that's all they have is good. There's no evil. And so if if you're a little kid and you control puppets, eventually they're going to smash them together and they're going to fight. It's just, a child is not benevolent, at least not in my understanding of the word. So the first part of the picture, as far as puppets and a puppet master, that would be a difficult one for me to reconcile with the word benevolent.
Well, yeah. So I'm not saying that the puppet master is God.
Okay.
Is that because what I'm saying? Because what you said, free will. My thought is that in order that you have to believe in free will to believe that God really is God.
Right.
Like there has to be free will. And so with the puppet master, there is no free will, because when the puppet says, "Oh, I love you," to the puppet master, is the puppet really saying it? No, it's the guy. The guy is saying, "I love you" to himself. Well, so that's not free will. When let's just, we could say the puppets never do anything wrong to one another. They never do anything bad. Well, yeah, okay, it's just because the guy never makes them do bad stuff. Like that was what I was trying to like kind of work over in my own mind was, how can there be bad stuff? Like, why would God allow, if God is real, if God really exists, why would he allow bad stuff? And what I came up against was, well, free will. He almost like he has to let me choose, because otherwise my love, if I don't have the ability to not choose him, to not love him, if I have to love him, then I'm a puppet. He's saying I love you to himself.
I see what you're saying.
But as soon as I'm not a puppet, as soon as he gives me actual life, actual free will, and I can say I don't love you, then when I say I do love you, that's real. That's what I was trying to reconcile in my own head, and kind of came up with this analogy. So I found myself like playing through this scenario in my mind of seeing it. Well, because if we can't do something wrong, then it's not really right.
Well,
It's not, if there is no evil, then there is no good. Does that make sense? I know that maybe that sounds kind of cliche and oversimplified, but
on the basis of free will being required to actually express a sentiment like love, that part I can agree with. But if the goal of creation, and again, this is I'm kind of being extemporaneous here. If the goal of creation, if you believe in that, is the goal, if you believe in creation as a thing, is the
Mm-hmm.
goal to create a bunch of creatures that love the creator? Like, is that the thrust of what the creation was for? And I'm not sure that that would be it. But if that's not the goal, if we leave that goal aside, I don't need these little humans to love me. I just want to set it in motion, and I want them to be happy. Then I think that there could be a world that's created without evil, and you could be happy, and we don't necessarily need torture and murder and war and rape or whatever evils exist in the world, or childhood cancer, or cancer at all, or
Mm-hmm.
like if you leave out the you must love the creator, then I think that we could potentially have free will, and even though it's not something that's easy to envision because it isn't the world we live in, I think that it would be possible to leave out the evils of the world and just make it happy little creatures. And so this is one of the reasons when we didn't record this conversation before, but we should have, that it's much easier for me to buy into the idea that we live in a simulation. And there's some really good evidence for that, because I think that if there was a super intelligent being that wanted to set this in motion, and I find this idea very infectious. It has taken root in my head and hard to get out. That if that was the goal, I don't want to make a simulation and see where it goes. You would set the initial conditions and let it go. And then you would be an observer on the outside, and you would actually be godlike to whatever came out of the simulation, because you can control all the parameters, and you can end the simulation, and you can maybe stuff out different parts of the simulation or rewrite the program or whatever. But it's basically just a casual observer, more in line with something like the God of Spinoza. If you've ever read about the Baruch Spinoza, he was a Spanish philosopher, naturalist, I think in the 1300s, where there was an entity, and he believed in something like the Force from Star Wars, that there wasn't. It was out there, but it just set us in motion, and watching like the natural world is kind of God. And even that I could buy into, but sorry. But yeah, I think just on a logical extensions, there's a lot of times where the sort of traditional stories about God, for me at least, I pick them apart and shouldn't really say.
It's all
I
right.
knew it was going to be loud over here,
It's
but
all right.
that's my little dog
So
barking.
what if the goal of creation isn't what if the goal of creation is relationship? That what if God created man so that he could have real relationship with them?
Real meaning that you need the full spectrum to have it be real, like the possibility of hate.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. No, real meaning, like I was saying, that we're not automatons. Because like I can create a robot, we could build a robot that has a relationship with me, and quote relationship, right? But is that actually a relation? Like, do I have a relationship with my phone? You know what I'm saying? Like it does everything I say. It interacts with me. Siri talks to me. But I don't have that's not a relationship. Not in the sense that I have a relationship with my wife or my kids or my mom or my dad, And so if that's what I my mind keeps going back to like a robot or a puppet or something that that is 100% controlled by the creator. Well, that to me, how is that ever a real relationship? How is that ever real love or real connection if it's something that the creator is controlling and doing just essentially for themselves, only until Steph chose you, like, because she chose to be with you. That's part of what makes it so significant. That's what makes it so meaningful, is that she wants to be, and she actually could have chosen to not be with you, to not love you. And that, to me, that makes the choice more, it makes the love more meaningful, more real. Because where if she didn't have a choice, if you were forcing her, through hypnosis or whatever, to be with you, well, we would all think you were a terrible person. Like if it came to light that you had just had her under hypnosis all these years and she had no choice, we'd be like, JRuss, like, oh my gosh, we'd hate you.
Sure.
But
yes,
obviously you haven't done that. And so does that make sense? Is that's kind
it
of,
does make sense.
So that relationship aspect, to me, that is so foundational. The free will and God's desire to have relationship with us means that I have to also have the opportunity and the ability to not choose him. And if we say that, then we may have to step back one step and say, okay, well then what is evil, or what it, and so if I choose not God, and maybe this is too broad. I haven't thought through this all the way, so I'm going to say it, and I may have to backtrack. But maybe evil is not doing God's will, not choosing God. And so then that means if I say I don't love God, I don't want to be with God, if I actually have the ability and the choice to do that, then that means I can go and I can push someone down. I can steal a car. Then that means I have to have the ability to do all those things that are not honoring to God, that do not seek that relationship with him, do not show. Is that fair? Does that make sense? Or how does that?
It does. I think that one of the difficulties with these conversations is that so many things come up at the same time, and like
so many,
there's different
so many
sort
angles
of channels to explore. I, all the way back to the beginning, there's a couple things that came up as you were talking of, like, required to love God. Are you required to love God to get into God's heaven?
That is a great question. I think I would. My understanding at this point is that God allows you to have what you want. If you want to be with him, you will get to be with him. If you don't want to be with him, then you won't have to be with him. Now, then we could talk about, okay, what does it look like to not be with him? That's another one of those rabbit trails. But so are you required to love him? I don't see it as a requirement. It's just, do you want to be with him or not?
Okay. Well,
Is that, or I'm really not trying to dodge your question, but am I dodging your question?
I mean, dodging is not the right word. I think that people in general, when they have different belief systems, most people, there are fringe elements always, but most people want their belief system to be reasonable and rational and understandable to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a few people that we probably call terrorists most of the time who don't give a shit if anybody understands or identifies. They're hardliners. That what I believe is the right way, and if I have to kill somebody for it, that's fine. Most people are not like that, and I know that you're not like that. So if my alternative to loving God is to spend an eternity in a place where I have a special skin that is burned off and magically is replaced so that I can have it burned off again, that's not a choice in my mind. And that is almost back to I'm a puppet. Like I have to do this, or I spend the rest of all time in hell.
Mm.
And that to me is very unpalatable. And and that doesn't sound like free will to me. And one of the things that I really struggle with about that concept in particular is the idea that if free will was the original problem, why there's evil in the world, and I have actual free will. Free will means that I can believe something other than what's written in a holy book. That's actual free will. And the idea to me that the omniscient being, omnipotent, all powerful, all knowing, all good being that created the parameters that I live under would then punish me for living in those parameters and having free will that includes the possibility that I don't believe in that system. And then because of that, I may not, that I have this crazy fate awaiting me when I die. That it breaks down for me the idea that there actually was free will, and I'm just a prisoner of this system. If I don't agree to it, excuse me, I go to hell. And then
Can I?
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I want to push back, but I really want to be sensitive and try to, because I think I understand what you're saying. I want to try to repeat it back first. So if the two options are do what God says or burn in hell forever, that's not really a choice, right? Is that what you're saying? Did I summarize it
Yep.
fairly? Okay. I do understand that, and that does not sound nice at all. It's like, that sounds like a tyrant.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, saying that I understand that, now let me step back, because we don't do that with other things. And this is where I'm going to push back, and I'm trying to be sensitive, but I'm also going to try to be direct. Like,
So let me just interrupt for a second.
Sure, yeah.
You don't necessarily have to be sensitive, because the belief system that I carry is not being violated by anything in this conversation.
Okay.
And so it's very
Well,
difficult to offend me in this kind of conversation.
Well, thank you. That's very nice.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you don't do that with everything else, like with your relationship with Steph. Can
you say that in a different way?
Yeah, I'm going to try to explain.
Okay.
Like, basically, and my relationship with my wife, with Tanya, right? Like, if I want to continue to be with Tanya and enjoy the blessings and the pleasures of life with her, I have to be faithful to her. If I go out and sleep around and get with a whole bunch of other women, she's not going to continue to be with me. She's going to kick me out of the house. She's going to divorce me. She's going to not want me to see the kids if I become a drug addict and whatever. And so to me, that's kind of it seems like the same thing. And so that's why I want you to tell me whether it is or isn't. Why, if it's not the same thing, I want to understand why, but it does seem very similar. We do that with lots of different things. Like with skydiving, you don't have to wear a parachute. You don't have to wear a rig, but you know the consequences, right? Like, so how is that different? Or is it the same? And we could see similarities or different or whatever, but does that make?
Yeah, but what comes to mind is the term false dichotomy. That I understand what you're saying, but that there is, and this is a really interesting nuanced part, that in my opinion, ethics and morality exist outside of religion, and so it is possible, in my mind, to live an ethical, moral life, treating other human beings the way that they deserve to be treated. It has nothing to do with religion. And so if I did that, and yet I ascribe to no God, and I ask for forgiveness from no one that I have not wronged, I am not, at least in my understanding of Christianity, if I have not repented my sins and asked forgiveness, I am not welcome into that kingdom. And yet, if that was the only thing missing, is that it? Now are we at a good analogy? Like in the relationship idea, there are choices, right? You have choices and I have choices, and you see a pretty girl and you could choose to go try to be with her, and of course our wives would not like that, but appropriately so. But I've made choices that don't fit into the scenario. But if I make good choices my whole life, live in an otherwise Christian way, but I don't satisfy the parameters of Christianity, I still am with murderers and rapists and anyone else who does not live in a way that I would call cohesive with other human beings.
You're
Because
saying
I
you'd
didn't.
still end up in hell. Is that what you're saying?
Right. I
Okay.
would. Um, and and I've had this similar debates all of my life. And they're some of my favorite conversations, except the idea that you said a few minutes ago, that I don't want to offend anybody's belief system. I want to have, logical and hopefully rational conversations, and hopefully both of us will come away a better person with interesting ideas. There are, as I understand it, 4 different times in the Bible that adherents are commanded to put their child to death if their child talks back. And I believe it's Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and actually one of the Psalms. And I would have to look it up to be totally accurate, but I'm fairly accurate that that's correct. And most people, I think, hardliners aside, would agree that's not the way I want to live. That doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not going to kill my child who doesn't know any better because they talk back. I'm going to try to teach them the right way to do it, but I can't do that. And on that basis alone, I think that you could potentially argue that morality and ethics can exist outside of that framework. And most religions have the feeling that they're trying to put out a framework for a good life and treating others with respect and dignity, and and uh, and yet in all religions, in my opinion, there's some things that I would strongly disagree with that are not ethical or moral. And so that was sort of later on in what you said, kind of about leading a good life and treating people correctly. And one of my issues with institutional religion.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I do know. I know one or two of the passages that you're talking about. I didn't realize there were 4. And I would honestly, to be able to even talk about those passages with any kind of knowledge or coherence, I'd have to go back and reread them and try to understand. I mean, I think my just off the cuff response specifically to that topic would be, well, I don't. I would really want to understand the context, the culture, like exactly, and go back and look at, since all those are in the Old Testament, the Hebrew, like what was really trying to be communicated. Why was that the case? Did it really mean? Was it a simple statement like, "Hey, your kid talks back one time, chop his head off"? Is that really what it was saying and what it meant? I I mean, I don't think so. I don't think that's what it meant. Just
But Chris,
the
do you find it
whole
interesting?
story of God and who God is. But there are lots of things in the Bible that are very hard to swallow, and I'm like, what?
And
What?
just that, just that, what you just said, the fact that I said there are places in the Bible multiple times that say put your child to death for something. That isn't something that you can just say, no, that doesn't exist. My religious book would not say to put a child to death. You have to go back and read it and try and contextualize what it says in the book, which I can empathize with. It's great that that's the way that you would want to approach it. There are people who have no need for that. It says put my child to death. I'm sick of this kid. I'm killing him, and I have a mandate from God. And for a non-religious person, that's really hard to see. And the other really honestly fascinating thing that you just said, which you may or may not be aware of, is that the the Bible, as far as I know, was originally written in Aramaic, and it has been translated, of course, into Arabic and Greek, and passed down through the ages, and finally we have, English versions of the Bible. Aramaic is very similar to Arabic in the fact that they do not put vowels into their written words. And that means that the original Bible was written as you had to take the meaning of the sentence from the context of what was written, because there were no vowels. And there could be any number of interpretations to those words. And in fact, one of my former teammates was trying to learn Arabic when we were living overseas, and he was like, this is monstrously difficult. You don't think that the subtraction of vowels is a big deal, but you could read it in 3 different ways, and all of them are equally valid. And when you're thinking about moral and ethical commandments that can then be interpreted in whatever way you want, or maybe not whatever way you want, that's too broad, but in multiple different ways. And then that translation has to get passed down and passed through a human being that can contextualize it in the way that they choose. That is, again, very difficult to swallow for a non-religious person, of like, I don't know who originally wrote this. I don't even know if this has anything to do with what they originally meant. And so you going back and studying a passage that says, put your child to death, I'll agree with you that maybe the people who wrote originally had no intention of saying that that was appropriate or in any way allowed. And somehow it's what we've got today.
Mm-hmm.
And again, very difficult for a non-religious person to find palatable.
Yeah. I think I would maybe just offer the correction. The Old Testament, I think, was primarily not Aramaic, but I think most of the original manuscripts that we have it is Hebrew. It wasn't Aramaic. Now, Aramaic was a dialect of Hebrew, and Jesus spoke Aramaic. But like, we have a lot of those original manuscripts still, and even like the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found like in the 1940s, I think.
Yeah.
Those are all Hebrew. Now maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. But I've also kind of going along like with what you're saying. I've always thought that the New Testament. What are you doing?
Trying to cover my mic. It's so loud. I'm sorry.
It's really not bothersome. It's really not. I mean, I can hear them, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's just a conversation in the background. Kind of going along with what you're saying, one thing that I've thought about that's kind of confusing. I don't know if confusing, but just interesting. The New Testament was written all in Greek. Okay. So, but Jesus was speaking primarily Aramaic. Okay. So, and all of his disciples, his 12 disciples, were Jews. So they were speaking Hebrew and Aramaic. So they're walking around following him. He's preaching and teaching in Aramaic or Hebrew, and then they're writing it down in Greek. So even if I can read Greek perfectly, like if I'm completely fluent in Greek, when I read Jesus's words, that's not actually his words, because he didn't say it in Greek. They translate it, And so what first made me realize that is when we lived in Thailand for 8 years. And so I got to the point where I was pretty fluent in Thai. And I started realizing, when I would translate for people would come to visit, or translate for friends, or even at church sometimes translate for people. I realized like, oh, wait a minute. It's really difficult. It's an art. It's a skill to be a good translator. It takes a lot of practice. And to get the nuance and the meaning and what they're trying to say, it's really hard. And so just one day I realized like, oh my goodness, I don't actually know, like the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5 and 6. Jesus gives this great long sermon. It's really cool. But I don't actually know what he said word for word, because I'm reading English, but I could learn Greek and go back. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So just to your point, there's a lot there. And I guess not. I don't know. I'm not trying to prove a point, or I'm just kind of
Yeah.
agreeing with what you're saying, that there's a lot there, and I don't know if that means that if that weakens my point of view or my faith, or that makes, or maybe that just means I have
Mm.
to have more faith or more trust, or like I look around, because for me part of it also is just looking around at creation, and everything fits together so well. That's part of, and I've, yeah, I mean, anyway, I don't know. I'm just rambling now.
Well, I mean, I think that it doesn't it hopefully doesn't, like, nothing that I ever want to say to somebody who I think is a good person and is taking the right things out of the Bible or the Quran or the Talmud or whatever, anything, any people who are doing their best to live a good life. I don't want to argue with those people, and I certainly don't want to take away from the faith or the pathway that they got there. And that's the difficult part of a rational conversation about religious texts it, is that it does have the potential to shake the foundations of what someone thinks, and it can topple those beliefs, or it can make them stronger. It can renew them, and there have been times in the past where I've talked to people and I feel like I've started to topple those foundations, and I don't really want to. I just want to say, hey, these are the difficulties that I see. I think that most people, if they're honest, when you're talking to them, they're probably going to admit that I don't take everything out of that book word for word, and the people that do take everything word for word, and we look at them as the fringe of our society, because some of that stuff can be, thou shalt not suffer a homosexual to live, like that can be taken in a way that doesn't fit into our world, and there's the very real history of people being put to death for who they love,
Mm-hmm.
and and I think that in that framework where you say I have to find the parts that resonate with me, and I kind of have to not abide by the parts that don't resonate with me. And in a spiritual or a philosophical book, man, I can totally agree with that.
Mm.
However, that does occasionally, depending on who you're talking to, really fly in the face of every word that is written is the unadulterated word of God.
Mm.
And if that statement were true, man, I mean, I have problems that abound. I just can't agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Because in your 45 years and my 52 years, I'm not ever putting down on paper, kill that child. Never. I don't know what I like. It could be the worst. This kid just murdered 3 of his classmates. He's 12 years old. Should we put him to death? No, we should not. Like, we need to sit down with some therapy and figure out what's going on. And and there's never a time I'm going to say kill that child. And so again, it depends on who you're talking to and how they feel about their holy book. But if that's the case, which is often the case, that people want to argue this is the word of God, because if they say that it's the word of God, then whatever part of it they believe in is bolstered. It's held up. But if it's not the word of God in this part, then is it really the word of God in this part?
Mm-hmm.
And then it gets kind of muddier.
Yeah. Yeah. When you said earlier about like morality and ethics outside of religion, I think that's really interesting to think about and talk about too. Like, how do you know what's right and wrong? How do you know good and evil? How do you know what that is? If there is no God, because I mean, I would say, if you ask me, I would say, well, God says what's right and wrong. Okay. Now, then those things that you're talking about, where the passage says your kid talks back to you, kill him, or homosexual, or whatever. Well, I would quickly argue, like, wait a minute, we need to, before we act on that, so hold down, slow your roll.
Yeah.
We need to figure out what this actually means. Is it actually? And I would argue it's not actually, I mean, that's maybe a misinterpretation, or we don't understand the context or something, but it doesn't mean for me today to go out and kill homosexuals. Absolutely does not mean that. Like, I don't
Right.
think that's what the Bible is teaching. I think there might be some passages in there that talk about those things, but anyways, so how do you know, apart from God, how do you know what's right and wrong? Like, how can we
Mm.
have morality if there
Well,
is no God? If there is no God.
yeah, I mean, the difficulty I think in answering that question comes in, especially when speaking to a religious person. Like I think that morality and ethics exist as part of any culture at any time. Um, Murdering your neighbor is wrong. If we go back 100,000 years to, I don't know who that would be, maybe not even really humans yet, they would understand that killing their neighbor is not right. Um, However, in the idea that um, there could have been at one point the unadulterated word of God, and that was somehow given to a human being or multiple human beings, and then in the subsequent 3 or 4 millennia, or however whatever the time frame is you think started the Old Testament, um, I think 2,500 BC might be accurate, but I would have to go back and check about the estimates of when that is. But maybe 4,500 years of then passing that story on and rewriting it, and there's a very valid argument from religious people that this was potentially the unadulterated word of God, and today the only way we had to pass it on was through human beings. Human beings have weaknesses and failings, and somebody changed this and they didn't think it was a big deal, and then 2 years later somebody else changed this, and now we're not sure.
Mm-hmm.
There's some messages in there that are really good and really make good sense, and really really resonate with us, and there's some other ones that just don't. And so within that idea, then it's very difficult to say that ethics and morality exist outside of religion, because it could just be that ethics and morality that I'm feeling came to me through the benevolent God, and I'm getting that even though I don't ascribe to those necessarily that book, but it still exists in only that way. And that's another argument it's very difficult to defeat. It's similar to, like, there are pink elephants on below the atmosphere of Jupiter. I don't know. You don't know, and nobody knows. And so if somebody says that with authority, well, could be,
Okay, whatever.
yeah, very difficult argument to have. But to be honest, and to be fair, most of the people that I think I've ever talked to have a very difficult time acknowledging that the Bible, as an example, is not the unadulterated word of God.
Mm.
And it just gets to be a slippery slope for them, on their belief system, if they acknowledge that, yeah, maybe human beings messed this up over 4,500 years.
Yeah. So, but wait, what? So where would morality come from? How do we know right and wrong if there is no God?
Well, I mean, I think that we have very good evidence from other species that they, even as limited as our communication is, they also have understandings of what's right and wrong. And specifically, some of our primate ancestors or primate relatives, or whatever your belief system is, primates, they clearly, especially higher primates, apes and bonobo chimps, and they clearly have a sense of right and wrong. And I mean, I guess you could argue that also is coming from God, but I don't know, other than the idea that of, like, osmosis, that the goodness just permeates their brain. They're never going to read the Bible. No one's ever going to explain that. They have no knowledge or concept of God, other than if we could potentially teach that to them, but I don't think we could. But that would be one avenue that you could say that right and wrong exists in nature. And if right and wrong only existed in Christianity, in that specific deity, wouldn't the rest of the world be absolute chaos?
No, well, no, not necessarily. I don't think. I mean, because because we would have a standard of right and wrong. Somebody, like, where do we get the standard is what I'm trying to get to. Like, if we say, because animals, I mean, I think I understand what you're saying about animals and apes and stuff, how you see them taking care of one another. But I've heard, I've never gone and done the research myself, so I can't say definitively, but I have heard or been told that even amongst gorillas and orangutans, and there is rape, like what
Yes.
we would say, like, so is that wrong for an orangutan but so I'm saying, how do we know that that's wrong to do that? How do you know that it's wrong to steal? Like, where does that come from? I'm saying, let's just for a second say that there is no God. Let's say he not any God at all, not the Christian God, not the God of the Quran or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Then how do we know that why or not how do we know, but why is it wrong? Because if we say it's just each culture decides, every culture has its own definitions of right and wrong, well then that is problematic, because there's cultures even right now today that are, they're taking their little girls and disfiguring their genitalia because their culture says that's okay. Well,
Yeah.
if we put it on the culture and we say cultures get to decide, then we can't say that's wrong because they decided that it's right. There's some cultures in Southeast Asia, in Thailand, where we live. There's some up in like villages, tribes and villages and stuff, where they think it's okay to sell their daughters to these Japanese businessmen to be taken and used as sex workers and send the money back home. They've decided as a culture that's okay. That's not okay. It's like, so
But
we can't say that cultures get to decide, because then if a culture agrees to do sorry, you're trying to talk and I keep going.
no, it's okay. Like, again, it's just there's so many ideas at the same time. But that specific one, Chris, the Bible gives instructions on how to sell your daughter into slavery.
No. Where?
I'd have to look it up.
Huh?
It does. I'd have
To
to look it
sell
up
your
to give
daughter
you a
into
check.
slavery.
Yeah, how to set a good price for your daughter. And on the heels of that, you and I are both going to look that up, and we'll talk about it on another side quest.
For sure.
And hopefully I'm not kind of talking out of my ass.
No.
On the heels of that, when you're talking about right and wrong, if we take humans out of the picture, is there right and wrong? Is there right and wrong in the universe? And if we that's an interesting concept. And if we re-inject humans, isn't right and wrong whatever we decide is right and wrong? And throughout history, hasn't that proven to be the case? That what we decide at that moment or during that time, and this is the idea of moral relativism, is right and wrong just what we say?
Yeah, I would say.
Well, the last lynching in America was 1955, 1956, where a black man was hung for being black, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. At the time, you could see pictures of white people crowding around the lynching. I was here. I was part of this. Good Christians, good religious people that found justification for that behavior wherever they were looking. And we look on those pictures now. You can Google those pictures or Wikipedia or whatever, and there's pictures of black men and women, children, hanging from trees and burned and disfigured, and you look upon them with the appropriate disgust and horror. But at the time, there's a very good chance, even I struggle to even say this out loud, but there's a very good chance as a white person that I would just feel that was normal. That's what happens right now in 1890, that this black guy looked at a white lady in the wrong way and let's hang him. And again, as a non-religious person, to know that there were, I'm sorry to use this expression because it doesn't apply today, but good Christians who not only watched, but actively ended the lives of other human beings because of their skin color. Like, that's was very difficult to reconcile. And
Yeah.
and if we're gonna have an honest talk about religion, I don't think that we can just limit it to some arbitrary starting point. And then the last thing, and I'm sorry because it's so many things at one time, and now I'm doing it to you, that that I think that morality and ethics existed long before the Bible was written down. And if we look at something ancient like the Epic of Gilgamesh, or the Tibetan Egyptian Book of the Dead, something that was, written down before Christianity even had their first adherents. There were ethics and morality in those people, and I guess that there's a pathway for you to say, and not you, just the metaphorical you,
Yeah.
that well, that was the God of Abraham that was speaking to those people, even though they believed in the sun god or whatever.
Yeah.
That was actually, and again, that's a very difficult argument to have, because when you fall back on God made everything happen, well, then we're kind of back at the first point of, why is there evil?
Mm-hmm.
If God made everything happen. It's a big topic. So much. There's so much.
So much there.
And I always feel the need in these moments to really reemphasize that if you read the Tao of Pu, and that leads you to a better life, I'm all for it. And if you read the Bible, or you read, the Bhagavad Gita, or whatever your book is, that the ideas bring you to treating human beings with respect and dignity, and basically following the golden rule, then I have no argument with you. It's just, there's a very cogent, coherent argument to say that the moderates of any religious position allow for the extremists. And
Can you unpack that a little bit?
Do you remember when of course you remember when the Twin Towers came down, and although I don't know that we're still certain who actually committed that act, because there wasn't a very good investigation by the US, but there was certainly conjecture on who committed that, and Al-Qaeda and ISIS. I don't know if ISIS was around then, but Al-Qaeda for sure, and fundamentalist Islam. And one of the arguments that was made during that time is, look, there's 1.6 billion people who ascribe to Islam.
Mm-hmm.
And what we really need in this moment is not Christians to tell fundamentalist Islam to get their shit together, but we need Islamic people to step up and take charge of this situation, and talk to their extremists, and figure out a way to stop having those extremists. And of course, we thought that bombs were a little bit quicker than that pathway, so that's the path we took. But there's 1.3 billion Muslims that I have no problem with. They're trying to lead a good life and have kids and grow up in a good world, and no violence, or very limited violence, certainly not bombing anybody. But then there's 300 million, according to some polls, that believe that jihad on the West is what is necessary. And through kind of, sorry to mix in this quote, but any means necessary. And that part is quite difficult. And so, do we get rid of 1.7 billion or 1.6 billion? Do we get rid of just the 300 million? And how do we do that when there's 1.3 billion that are pretty good people? And I have no problem with them. And so there's that you get into that idea of like the middle, the moderates. They don't per se allow for the extremists because they don't like them any better than I do. But the fact that we feel like we want them to have free will, we want them to be able to decide and self-determine their lives, means that we are always going to have those extremists as well. And so it's not that you're allowing for it or you're creating them, but
I see what you're saying. The moderates allow for the extreme. I got you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And that's in that. to be clear, not
Any
just
religion.
Islam, but Christianity, same
Yeah.
thing. I mean, that's humanity, I think.
I mean, when I was a kid, and I don't think this is happening too much anymore, but doctors were being shot at abortion clinics by fundamentalist Christians. And I'm sure you remember the same thing. It was happening all over. And I mean, that's a microcosm of the Twin Towers, but it's only a difference in scale, really. It's not.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm sorry to be callous about those two things, but they're fundamentally the same act in a way different scale.
It's terror on a level. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so much to think about, but again, nothing that I say wants to take away from good people living good lives.
Yeah.
It's just that the same book that inspires you to be faithful to your wife and treat your kids as the treasure that they are, and lead a good life and try to help people and create an education system. And in that same book, or a very similar book, we have Twin Towers coming down. We have Hamas killing 1,400 people and the Jews killing 7,000 people. And those kinds of conflicts that find justification in somewhere in the religious writing is, again, very difficult for non-religious people to swallow.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm saying this, we have covered so much ground that it's very difficult to have an accurate, on-point talk. Like, you know what I mean? Like, normally, if there's this kind of talk, like if you go back and listen to like Christopher Hitchens' debate, Alistair, what was his last name? Christopher Hitchens, if you remember him, he's no longer with us. He used to debate religious guys in a very civilized manner, except that he was drinking scotch and smoking cigarettes. But other than that, it was the intent was to have a rational conversation between two human beings that have wildly different views and come out of it and be able to shake hands and yet disagree. And if you watch some of those, they are so hyper-focused on one thing because it's very difficult to have a wide range of conversation because there's so many things left unsaid from what we just talked about. And so I will acknowledge that it gets very difficult. And we've been talking for an hour and 20 minutes. It's almost, honestly, because it's so wide ranging, like a soundbite and then a soundbite and then a soundbite. And we never really, we never do a deep dive on anything because but I thought of this and now you thought of this and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So if
I was writing down thoughts and notes, it'd be a full page, like so much to try to say. Well, man, I want to say that I think it's really awesome. It's meaningful to me. It's special to me that we can do this, that we can sit and talk rationally, and that you're willing to, along with me, like dig through these things because I think they're very important, and that we should give these. I think everyone in the world should give all this stuff a lot of thought.
I agree.
And I should be willing to question all of my beliefs. And I should be willing to listen to your point of view and say, okay, what does that mean for what I believe? What does that mean for what I've been taught, how I've been brought up? Do I need to change something about the way I'm thinking? Do I need to, rethink that? It's too important to not give it thought and conversation and dialogue and maybe even uncomfortable, like it's that important, I think, that we should do that, because how can I grow? How can I learn? How can I be better? How can I do more and be better if I'm not willing to be questioned, if I'm not willing to be pushed and say, hey, uh, the Bible does teach this, or, when you say that, you're thinking like this, that means this. Oh, I never thought of it like that. Okay, let me spend some time on that. So for me, it's very it's very special that you're willing to do this with me, and that we get to do this.
I think one of the things that allows these conversations to go well, at least on my end, is the absolute certainty that I don't know. And I think the term agnostic is sometimes viewed as a pejorative, but in my opinion, it most accurately describes everyone. We don't know, and I think the difficulty that we get into as a society or as a human species is when people lose that concept, and they get into a framework of, I do know. I know better than you. I know exactly how this is supposed to go. And then within that, anything is possible, including violence and murder. And if you just back up from that viewpoint and say, I don't really know, not in the sense of truly knowing something. We are all, in my opinion, agnostic and doing the best that we can. And agnostic, in my understanding, means we don't know.
Yeah.
And once you get the certainty that you do know, I would almost guarantee problems are right on the horizon.
Yeah.
But if you can not get to that point, then you can talk to anybody. You don't have to defend your position. I can believe something that's different than you believe, and we're still okay.
Yeah. That's funny because I saw just the other day a little clip. It was Ricky Gervais, and I don't know who the guy he was talking to. They were on stage, like having a little conversation, and the guy said something about, okay, let's say there's 3 doors. God exists, God doesn't exist, and I don't know. And Ricky Gervais was like, whoa, stop. He goes, what do you mean? There's not 3 doors. I don't know. That doesn't matter. That's not a door. And he's like, what? No, there's 3 doors. He's like, no, there's not 3 doors because God exists. I believe in God. I don't believe in God. And I don't know. I don't know is always there. He's like, I don't know. That's everybody. That's always there. So put that away. That's not a thing. That's not a door. It's a choice. I choose to believe in God. I choose not to believe in God. It's a choice. Like one of the, and that was like basically the end of the clip. And I'm going to say for now, that's where I'm at. That resonated with me because I do think that it is somewhat of a choice. Like I choose to believe in God because of all the things that I see. Everything, when I take in everything that I have at my disposal, all the knowledge, all the information that I have available to me, I think I look at the life of Christ in the New Testament. I see who he was as a man. And I think I choose to believe if I can be like him, if I can really try to be like that man, who he was, who Jesus Christ was, the Jesus I know from the Bible, if I can try to be like him, I think I'm going to make the world better. I think I'm going to be a blessing to everybody around me, whether they choose to believe in him or not. And so that's where I'm at. And so I think that's cool that you said, because it is, I think, somewhat of a choice,
I agree.
So
yeah. And then one more time, I like that. I mean, I don't agree with the belief system, but I wholeheartedly agree with how it affects your life. And similarly, it's when I see the world, it's not maybe the filter that I look through, but I can still appreciate that it is for other people. Right up until the point they want to hurt other people for not believing the same thing.
Yeah.
Which I don't think you disagree with either. But
no,
it's
I
a
do
very, very difficult, I mean, it's just that part gets lost for some people, and we call them extremists or fundamentalists or whatever other term we apply. But it basically boils down to somebody who is so entrenched that other people need to be hurt if they don't agree with what I believe. And that one's tough.
Yeah. Well,
one day.
Yeah. So I don't know what the sign off is for side quest, man.
To be honest, Chris, I could talk about this for days. So, this will have to be, I'm guessing that the way that, this has gone, and then this is our second, basically we're at probably about 3 hours of this. And I mean, we got a lot of meat left on the bone, so our side quest might regularly dip into this. But I don't think, I mean, I never think that's bad, and especially if there's anybody who's going to listen to this stuff and find, I think people generally find this topic interesting, like especially when it's not just an echo chamber, but there's cohesive arguments on both sides. Argument in the sense of just a good discussion.
Sure.
Then I don't think that's bad. We can talk about this whenever we want.
Yeah.
And it's your podcast. We can do whatever we want.
It's our podcast.
Yeah.
Our. Sorry, Goose. We. Dude, I gotta say, I'm really excited about the 17th, 18th, and 19th that you're going to be down here.
Yeah, man. To be honest, like this is really like my brain has been spinning a few different times about exactly how I'm going to handle this with because although I do teach angle flying quite a bit, it's never in a dedicated camp like this, and like I'm not sure everybody's skill set. I'm not sure where everybody wants to go with that weekend, but I'm super excited. It's gonna be fun.
Well, and like I said to you I'm gonna say the other day, but it was a long time ago. Like I want to jump with you, but I also want to be respectful of all those people that have, they've asked you to come down here. They're in a, hired you or paying you to be here, paying you to coach them. I don't want to get in the way and be a part of something that I shouldn't be a part of or be, horning my way in. But I definitely hope that we at least have an opportunity to jump together at least once or something.
Yeah.
But I'm excited for you to be down here. That maybe we can at least go.
That's
get a taco or
probably
something.
Not for me to say because I'm the paid person.
Yeah.
But maybe you should talk to them and see if they need outside video. I mean, that's always,
maybe so. Maybe so. That's a good idea.
Maybe they want to. Hey, I'll do outside video at no cost.
There you go.
Everybody wins.
That's a good idea.
Yeah,
I like it.
Cool.
Well, no, but what I was saying a second ago, the sign off, because usually we say, well, you've done it again. You've wasted another perfectly good hour, but this is a side quest.
Might not be a waste.
I don't know. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
You have spent another hour and a half this time with us, JRuss and Chris, listening to all our ramblings and discussions and arguings. I hope it was beneficial to you if you did listen, if you tuned in. I'm really thankful for you, JRuss. I'm thankful for the friendship that we're growing and getting to know each other, and thankful for who you are as a man. You're a blessing to me, and I'm thankful for you, man.
I'm enjoying it, and I would use slightly different verbiage, but I will reciprocate that message. And I wonder actually. So this one we didn't really say, hey, we're going to broadcast at this time, and even though it's basically the same time, it's just you and me the whole time. But people are going to listen to this. I know, because hundreds of people are downloading these things, and I hope that our next side quest will have something to do with the responses that we get from people who actually do listen, and that there are either questions or retorts, and similar in the vein of I don't know. I'm always really happy to hear contradictory ideas, and not that I'm ever going to get to a point of feeling like I'm right or I'm wrong, but if something that I've said in the content of this podcast, someone says, you know what, JRuss, there's not 4 times that the Bible says kill your child, or there's no part of the Bible that says you can sell your daughter into slavery. I don't want to be wrong any longer than I have to be. Wrong is, I've definitely been wrong. I don't know if I've ever been right, but hopefully the comments will be in good taste and in fairness, but also that they should challenge anything that is heard, and if I'm wrong, set me right.
Both of us for sure. Yeah. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get some good feedback.
Dude, I love the way you phrase that. I don't want to be wrong any longer than I have to be. That's good. I mean, that's very good.
Listen, 10 or 15 years ago, I was given a tracking seminar, and I said at that time, which was conventional wisdom, if you're out of the jump at around 7,000 feet, I want you to turn around, go 180 from the jump, and go away and stop trying, because breakoff's going to happen and you're going to be a variable in there that's very unstable. And Sharon came to me after and said, why 180? And I said, well, kind of to get them as far away from the jump as they can be. And she said, what if somebody else is lost too and still coming forward? That'd be bad. Okay. And so whatever that was, it was at the Sebastian invasion in like 2009 or 2010 or something. And she was a pretty new jumper, and I was not a new jumper. And she doesn't remember the interaction because I brought this up to her. But at that moment, I realized I was wrong. And cool, somebody just set me straight, and I don't have to be wrong when I say that to anybody else, or worse yet, not just be wrong, but cause an accident because I told somebody to do something and they did it, and then it wasn't the big blue sky and they died. So that was a great moment for me. And to be honest, just a great interaction. Here's this relatively new jumper coming up to the organizer and saying, hey, I don't really like that. And she was totally right. So in that, I try and keep that kind of a situation in mind all the time when I don't want to be wrong any longer than I have to be.
Yeah. That's good, man. Very cool. All right. Well, thanks for this, JRuss. That was good. That was good, man. It's fun.
I'm glad we hit record.
Yeah, me too. I hope other people enjoy it as well. And I hope we get some good comments. I like that. That'd be fun to read those and talk about those.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll see you in a couple weeks, I guess, right?
Yeah. Maybe next week for a podcast and then for some actual jumping.
Yeah. No, I mean in person. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, JRuss. Thanks everybody for listening. Hope you guys get out there, jump out of an airplane, get up there in the sky, have some fun, and enjoy skydiving. Don't forget, we're getting to jump out of airplanes, man. So fun, so much fun. Don't be so focused on getting better and progression and all that you forget to have fun. You know, sometimes I find myself doing that. I'm like so hyper focused on what I need to do, and I forget to have fun. So I want to encourage everybody, have fun. Just get out there and have fun.
Cool.
All right, Krāv, do more, be better. Thanks, JRuss.
Thanks, Chris.
See ya.